Okay, there are a lot of football games out there that really suck. Some of them are really, really, really bad. Others are okay, but become kind of disappointing after a little while. And some games are legendary. And there are some games that are so good that people are still talking about them decades later. So what's the difference? You know, what separates the good games from the games that are really lame? Well, I'll tell you what, I haven't necessarily played every single football game that's out there, and I'm definitely not a game designer, I'm not a programmer or anything like that. But I can tell you that I know what I like and what I don't like, and I've played a whole ton of these football games and have at least some idea of the strengths and weaknesses of each one. And so I think that my opinion perhaps can form a pretty good framework of what to keep in mind if you're making your own game, or if you just want to talk about why certain games are horrible. So let's start with the most obvious thing, which is graphics, how the game's presented to your player. Of course, you don't really need a graphical engine for your game. There are football games out there that have nothing but text, and some of them are just fine. But the more modern games are usually going to have at least some sort of graphical engine. Now you have to think about why in the world you've got the graphics engine. I mean, even if you're EA, the point of graphics is not to like show off and be like, oh look, it looks just like TV or whatever. No, the real point is to show the player what's going on. You want to give the player information through the graphics that helps them visualize what's happening on the field. And that will help a lot with immersion, with what's going on in their brains. Now that's important even if you're talking about a sim or a game that's not just, a video game that you play with, one of these controllers or whatever, right? If you're talking about like one of these sim games where you have to use your imagination more or whatever, the stuff you're showing the player still makes a difference. It has a lot to do with immersion. Some games do this really well and other games really, really struggle. So take a look at a game like Action PC Football, for example, which actually is pretty popular among a certain segment of gamers. While the simulation aspects are nice, they can be frustrating, and that frustration is largely because of the way that the graphics are presented. Compare that with XOR NFL Challenge, which is from the mid-80s, and I still think is the king of the strategic simulators. So the graphics here in the game are very simple, it's just X's and O's. But it conveys everything that it needs to convey on each given play. Now, the thing is, if you're really interested in modern game design and modern game programming, you're probably not going to make a text-based football game. You're probably going to want to make something that looks a little bit more advanced than that. And the thing is that regardless of like the type of engine you create to determine your results, there are certain graphical things you want to make sure will make it into your game to help your player along and to help with immersion. Blocking is one of those obvious things. So for many of us, the reason the old Tecmo Super Bowl game on the NES works so well is because blocking is simply done right. The players grapple with each other and you can easily see what happens when one player beats the other. In contrast, games like the old Madden games used a pretty rudimentary blocking system. If you look closer and in slow motion, you can see that nobody's really blocking anybody. Now, Madden 95 was a clear improvement. This is after EA completely revised its game engine. You can see blocking actually take place here, though it's not as satisfying as Tecmo Super Bowl was. Now, blocking really is a key, even if you're not making like an arcade style game, even if you're not making like a 2K5 or 2K8 ripoff or whatever, or Tecmo Super Bowl #2 or whatever it is you want to do, right? If you're playing a sim, you still need to show that blocking game. It helps a lot if the player needs to find the hole for his running back to go through when he's controlling the game, obviously. But if you're having your player act only as the head coach, it still helps for that player to visualize where the hole is forming and why as much as you can. The reason why is because in the real world of football, a lot of stuff happens just on the line, and a lot of stuff happens because of blocking patterns. Again, if I'm looking at this pretty nondescript graphical engine and I can't see how the blocking works, it's going to be impossible for me to feel immersed in the game. Now obviously, not every game is going to get the amazing flow and feel of blocking in the final games of the NFL 2K series, for example, and that's understandable. What we have to realize is that 2K made sure to actually show you as a player what is happening on the line. It didn't just skip over the details the way that Action PC Football does. And you can follow the blocking patterns clearly even in non-serious games like NFL Blitz.
He goes flying.
The same is true of games like Mutant League Football. So seriously, like I've just said, if you're making even like a card and dice game, you still really should pay a lot of respect to what happens on the line. I'm not just talking about like basic lip service, like, oh, well, we have like a zone rating and they have a zone rating and we like do something to combine them. I'm talking about like you need to start thinking in terms of individual ratings. Now, in my mind, that's the sort of thing that differentiates the games that are really good and that last the test of time from those that are mediocre and that are going to fade away. So APA football was almost certainly revolutionary for its time, but line players never really come into consideration in this game. Compare that with the more modern 4th Street football, where the matchup on the line might turn what otherwise would be a gain into a loss. Now, I bring this point up because I think it really speaks to what your game engine actually is. So people who really care about these games are going to be able to tell if you've got like an algorithm that's designed to only give yards to the offensive backs or to the quarterbacks or whatever, like certain board games I can think of, or if you're actually trying to go in and really simulate the sport and how the sport works. That requires you to understand how the sport works, which, again, it depends on which kind of sim you're looking at. There are some where I'm not convinced that they understand how it works. Anyway, the thing you have to keep in mind is that the tricks that worked in like the late 50s do not work today. Now, you've also got to worry about play control if you're making an arcade-style game. You want the game to be easy and natural for the player to control, something where they don't have to think a lot. Some of that has to do with the basic game design. The old Madden games, for example, had these boxes that would pop up during pass plays.
That one didn't have a chance.
The problem is that you couldn't always see if you were about to be sacked since the boxes were in the way. Plus, the information in the boxes didn't tell you if the guy was actually open or not.
That one didn't have a chance.
So there's a reason why nobody who makes an arcade-style game uses anything like those passing boxes anymore, right? It's because they're horrible. They get in the way, and really, if you can figure out how to sort of scale your sprites, you don't need to use them. So what does that have to do, though, with play control? Well, I'll tell you, there is nothing more frustrating than playing a game where the game gives you certain information that turns out to be completely wrong. So believe it or not, it's probably better just to have the players run off screen than use those stupid boxes. But if you want this to work right, you really need to give the player enough information to make an informed decision before they do something. If there's a natural, logical flow between the information the player has and what takes place, your player will feel like they're in control and they will love your game. But if it feels like things are just happening at random, no one's going to want to play it. Now, one of the reasons that you need to provide the players with accurate information about how the engine is working during the course of the game is because it helps a lot with play calling, right? If the information that you're providing the player is extremely limited, like in a certain text-based sim I can think of, the game is not going to feel like it's any fun at all. I don't want to rip too much on Action PC Football, but in hindsight, that was my biggest problem with that game. I had some information, sure, but it was never enough for me to make an intelligent play calling decision. Again, the problem lies in the game engine, which glosses over things like blocking, exact defender positioning, the probability of winning certain matchups, and so on. In contrast, an old game as simple as Tecmo Super Bowl gives you more than enough information to let you know what's really happening. For example, if I notice that the same defensive player keeps beating my blocker, I know not to go to that side anymore. It's a simple approach, sure, but it gives me information that is actually useful. And it's a lot easier to follow than a bunch of boxes that don't actually do anything. So play calling kind of works like this, right? You're always looking to see, is there a place where we're struggling? Is there a person who's beating us? And what can I do to get around them? Or is there a way I can go past them, right? Now, most games might promote the fact that they have, thousands of different plays to choose from or whatever. I can think of a college football game that just came out not long ago that talked about having 3,000 plus plays, right? But the truth is, it is not the number of plays that are available to you that really matters. Most of those plays are going to be like very, very slight variations off of each other. No, what you need is a good variety of plays, and they need to be high quality plays. And you need to make it so that your gamer can easily decide what his strategy is going to be. Front Page Sports Football Pro 95, for example, has thousands of plays to choose from. But when you dig in, the problem is that it's not always clear what the difference between all these plays actually is. And there's not much of a point in having thousands of plays if they're almost all the same.
Safety!
And then you have the problem of just how the play is called, right? So the best games that are out there will make it so that you know exactly what the play is designed to do and where it's going and what's likely going to happen. The worst games that are out there are so vague that you honestly have no clue. Again, in Football Pro 95, you can make it so the play descriptions are really generic. This is closer to what you've got in like the Apple Football board game. Or you can have it so that full play diagrams are shown, though these things are also pretty generic. But the problem with Front Page Sports is that the game doesn't automatically group play calls into formations. You have to set all of that up by yourself. The Madden games have the formations, sure, but sometimes you forget which formation has the play you want to call. The worst offender, though, has got to be Super Play Action Football, where it's just a bunch of dots arranged in some sort of totally random order. Anyway, I say all of this because if you really want to have like a ton of plays in your game, do a favor for your player and like arrange them in some way that makes at least some sort of sense, right? So that you don't get lost playing the game. I say that as somebody who's gotten lost playing these games a lot. This is where the Tecmo Bowl series really shines, especially the NES games. The play calling is limited, sure, but it's also simple and it's easy to understand. And you can change the playbook in Tecmo Super Bowl, which is a fantastic addition. For a more modern game, something like 2K5 is really what you want. You can see at a glance who the ball carrier or primary receiver is going to be, and the play calls even tell you what the blocking scheme is going to look like. And the thing is, it's not complex. Really, it does not have to be complex. You can make it really simple, right? People still play Tecmo Super Bowl today just like they did 35 years ago, right? There's a reason why. It's simple and it's easy, right? But you do want to make sure that your players can, actually call plays. Because if they can't call plays, they're not going to like your game. That's really my biggest problem with the Tecmo Bowl arcade game. You can't call plays and you can't change your target receiver, which means that you'd better hope that you guessed right before snapping the ball. 10-yard fight is bad as well, and it's about as primitive as it gets. Seriously, one of the joys of playing a football game is the ability to call your own plays and determine the action for yourself. So why take that away? So personally, I'm a bigger fan of using play diagrams and using like vague descriptions, right? This depends on the game engine, of course, but you want to make it as easy as possible for your player to understand what play he's calling and what it's supposed to do. The truth is that games that use like a text-based engine where, you vaguely describe this thing or that thing are going to run into trouble because there's no set terminology in the world of American football, right? Like, I can't even think of anything off the top of my head, right? But, there's all sorts of different terms and different names for like different routes and different, blocking patterns and stuff like that. Like you don't want to leave any of this up to chance. In my opinion, you're much, much better off making just a play diagram and going with that, right? Now, if your gamer does not understand what play he's calling and doesn't understand what it is that he's trying to do with that play, there will be no immersion. Instead, playing your game is going to feel like a chore. Anyway, this is why I'm really not a big fan of just using text boxes to call plays. Now, I understand why games do this, and it's not just Action PC that takes this approach. But it really adds a lot more to the game experience if you can look at an actual play diagram.
Alexander will get the carry on first down and only gets back to the line of scrimmage. Second down from the I. Quarles tips.
This is where 4th Street Football, for example, really shines. That game is designed around those matchups, and you can really visualize what is happening when a play succeeds or fails. And like I said, if you want to demonstrate this virtually, you're much better off looking to Tecmo Super Bowl than anywhere else. The reason that game has remained relevant for so many decades is because you can actually see what's going on. And it makes it feel so much more satisfying when Bo Jackson beats out a broken play for a touchdown. Anyway, there's a real brief outline of how I feel about this subject. I'm sure that a lot of you will disagree, but I do think that the majority of you will understand what I'm trying to say here and sort of where I'm coming from, right? And I will admit, I haven't played enough games yet to become the total expert on this subject. There are a bunch of well-known sims that I haven't really gone through yet, and tons of video games left to go. We have a whole lot left to do on this channel. But the thing is that I'm getting my game count up, and from now on, when I start talking about, other games in the future, we're going to be looking at this stuff, like how do you call plays in this game? How does the game give you information? Is the game giving you accurate information or inaccurate information? Can you see what you're doing at all, or is the thing just a complete mess and waste of time? Anyway, let me know what you think down below, and I will talk with you again next time. Bye.